as someone who's during this whole crisis that we've been in, kind of taken an interest in how the modern shaped world is today, I can think back to studying counterculture in the '60s and how much of a role today's progressive. So, for example, people that espouse certain similar things that you're mentioning, like I think of like AOC, I think of left-leaning parties here in Canada, like the NDP. These ideas in the whether they were formed in the academy, in the university systems, how much did the '60s and counterculture have to do with it? Was it which I'm sort of on the edge of in terms of my observation and my hypothesis after studying this, but is it the collapse of the importance of the church and the importance of the religious institutions in the '60s, kind of, that young people began to look towards idealistic, they looked for somewhere else for that ideal, and so they thought that the Marxist or the collective principles of me fighting for something greater than myself in the same realm of the Christian Judeo-Christian value system. Do you think that contributed? And then the university professors were just like pumping oil on the fire, basically.
Well, I think all of that is true, but I think that the issue really is that the 1960s were a new phenomena, what Ayn Rand called it the new left, and you're seeing that today. But that the shift was happening for decades before that. So the shift away from capitalism really started in the 1880s and 90s with the progressive movement. And the progressive movement was already taking Marx's ideas, taking Hegel's ideas, undermining American individualism, bringing out the ideas of collectivism. But they still had this respect for ideas, respect for reason, respect for science. They were Marxists, much more fundamentally Marxists, but they was clearly undercutting American capitalism. And of course, American capitalism didn't die 10 years ago. It didn't die in the financial crisis. American capitalism died in 1890 when antitrust laws were passed for the first time. And in the, 1914 when income tax and the Federal Reserve was established in the 1930s with the Great New Deal. So with the New Deal, so the capitalism has been dying, being murdered really slowly for a long, long time. But what happened in the 1960s is a new generation came about who was reading the existentialist, who was reading the postmodernist, who was writing their own ideas. And they were now rejecting what's called the old left. They rejected Marx to a large extent. They rejected the old philosophers. They didn't know they were channeling them in some ways, but they reject. Their view is reason is impotent. Science is impotent. Remember, Marx argues for scientific socialism. The 60s are anti-scientific socialism, right? They don't want science in socialism. They just want their feelings. Go to Woodstock. It's not about Marx. Mm-hmm. It's about hedonism, emotion, self-expression without a self, if you will, right? Yeah. So they want a kind of collectivism that's tribal and emotionalist and postmodern. Mm-hmm. So what you see from the 60s to today is the intellectual, and so their professors were these Marxists who were trying to tell them, oh, no, we still need the structure, we still need reason, we still need thought, we still need ideas, we still need evidence. And these kids are saying, no, we don't need any of that, we just need our emotions. We just, reality is meaningless, reality is unknowable, it's all in our head, you're determined by your race, you're determined by your genes, whatever. All of this is nonsense. And then they become the professors. So what you get over the last 40 years is that the new left, the 60s counter-revolution, are the dominant intellectuals in our culture. And what are they teaching? They're teaching critical race theory, which says that you're determined by your race and it's inherent in you. And therefore, as a white person, you should feel guilty. As a black person, you should feel a victim. And as a brown person, I get somewhere in the middle. And there's this whole categorization of victimhood, right? Which is this, what do they call it now? They have this whole hierarchies of who's bigger victim. And
the oppression hierarchy?
What's that? The oppression hierarchy. There's a term which has just slipped through our mind. But intersectionality, right? The whole intersectionality movement is about this hierarchy of oppression, and it has to do with your sexuality, and it has to do with they've discovered 92 sexes, and it has to do with your race, and they've discovered lots of different races, and all of this is completely devout of science. It's completely, I mean, Marx would be shocked by it. Economics, which is Marx's hallmark, right? Economic class, is only one of the many, many, many categories of oppression. And what they have done is they've completely made emotions as the most important thing in the world. That's why they view speech as violence, because if you offend them, you hurt your emotions. That's like them being punched in the nose. They don't see a difference in that. And they have destroyed, they're the anti-enlightenment forces today. Now, I think they're pretty impotent because they don't have a theory. They don't have anything to stand on. They don't really have ideas. Their ideas are meaningless because at the end, it's all grounded in emotion. But they dominate the intellectual world today, and you hear their voices constantly. And this is what people like Jordan Peterson are speaking up against. But again, the challenge there is, do you have a set of ideas to replace this? And that's where Peterson and others, I think, fail. They don't have something coherent, idealistic to replace what these intellectuals. And note, these intellectuals are not idealists. What's the idealism of critical race theory? It's not color blindness. They don't believe in color blindness. That was Martin Luther King. That's the old left. The new left doesn't believe in color blindness. They want us all to be color, conscious, right? Constantly think about color. Is it socialism? Is it some socialist utopia? Not really. The postmodernist critical race theory people, they just want control. It's not about even socialism. It's about control. They want to run your life. They want to run your life based on some ridiculous hierarchy. But their system falls apart. There's no coherent ideology. Even AOC and to some extent Bernie Sanders are still to some extent remnants of the old left. They still believe in socialism, right? But the real, the people behind BLM, Antifa, people like that, they don't believe in socialism. They believe in mayhem. They believe in destruction. They believe in hate. They believe in nothing. Ayn Rand called it, what they really worship is the zero, is nothingness. And it's true that religion plays some role in here in two ways. One, the rejection of religion and the idea of what now, where the values come from. But also, I would argue, and Ayn Rand would argue, that religion conditions them towards emotionalism. Because what is religion? How do we know God exists? Because we feel it. There is no logical explanation. There's no rational explanation. So what religion conditions people is to feel, to have faith, to believe in revelation, and to be collectivist. And then these intellectuals capitalize on the fact that these kids are being raised religious to move them towards this nihilistic, anarchistic point of view. But they're not even fighting for an ideal anymore. There's some socialists out there believe in something, but the people in the streets, they don't believe in anything other than hatred.